Let's explore how quickly you could master Buddhism. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. Whoopsie. Well, that's odd. Okay, well, thank you very much, Word. The question begins. Very interested in Buddhism. Where do I start? As silly as it sounds, I've been reading a lot of J.D. Salinger. Recently, who discusses a lot of religious philosophy and Zen meditation. I'm going through a lot, I'm sorry to hear that, and have important surgery coming up, which can be terrifying. Coming up soon, as well as a very packed school year ahead. And I've become interested in Buddhism, no doubt. I'm definitely more interested by meditation and spiritual teachings, more figurative, and less about literal stuff, like how the universe was made and what happens after death. Where should I start to learn more? Well, how's about right here? Let us begin with broad brushstrokes before we make our way over to fine details. I'm looking for the Four Noble Truths. Where, oh where have they gone? Here we go. All right. So it is said, legend tells us that the Buddha began his teaching career with a discussion of the Four Noble Truths. The first truth is there are stressors. Ask biologists, they'll agree. There are circumstantial stressors, physical stressors, interpersonal stressors, and mental stressors. We evolved both the capacity to perceive stress as well as the capacity to respond to stress in a way that would increase the chances of our surviving long enough to reproduce, thanks to evolution and natural selection. So there are many, many primal drives. I like thinking of them in terms of 7. The 3 basic are shoving and reaching and clinging. I like to think of in terms of the 6 F's. Let me know if you've heard this one before. Whenever encountering something, our bottom of our brain basically, metaphorically, asks 6 questions. Hey, that thing I've just seen, should I fuck it? Should I feed on it? Should I fight it? Should I flee from it? Should I faint before it? Should I fawn over it? These are primary drives. We see them, them being the go-to moves in all survivors of trauma, especially childhood trauma. Now, these drives are not our foes. They serve a purpose. The liberation that the Buddha offers us is not liberation from the presence of the tools of the 3 primary drives, but from the tyranny of those drives over our choices and our utterances and our deeds. So in other words, our primary drives, our survival drives, are excellent tools, but very bad tyrants. So that's the Buddha's method, is taking these survival instincts and relegating them to tools and not our bosses. You know, when we were kids, all kids would put their hands on their hips and say to an older kid, "You're not the boss of me." That's basically what's going on. So the method by which we do this is called the Eightfold Path. And what if enlightenment was nothing mystical, was nothing magical? That doesn't mean you belch rainbows. It simply means that we have so mastered the Buddha's Eightfold Path that we practice it spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. You're probably smarter than me, but when I was a kid, I struggled to learn how to tie my shoes. It took a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of tears, a lot of repeat instruction. But eventually, by the time I was ready to enter first grade, I had so mastered tying my shoes that I could do so spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. It is my understanding that enlightenment is simply that degree of mastery for the Eightfold Path. So let's take a deeper look at what this Eightfold Path is. But first, spoiler alert, or I should say plot twist. There are a bunch of shitheads prancing about the countryside, insisting that it's very hard and takes a long time. And in fact, they say the length of time it takes for the universe to create itself and then destroy itself and then rest and then do that 2 more times is the length of time it takes to become a Buddha. But that is not what the Buddha taught. In the second to the final passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha promised that it is possible to master his path in 7 years, or 7 quarters, or 7 months, or 7 fortnights, or 7 weeks, or even 7 days. He didn't say it's for special people who were born in a special time in a special place. It's just a general thing. And so we can work backwards from this and say, therefore, if the way that Buddhism is taught cannot produce Buddhas like a great Pez dispenser, just knocking them out left and right, then it's probably merely an analog of Buddhism. So I'm going to scooch back at a dizzying rate and take a deeper look at that. There we go. So here's the funny thing. When Buddhism is taught correctly, it is not intellectually challenging. If someone tells you you need a PhD to become a Buddha, remind them Buddha said it can be done in a week, and you can't earn a PhD in a week. Therefore, they are incorrect. So, most of us, if you're watching my funny face over YouTube, odds are you were not raised in a culture where you've spent the majority of your life sitting on the ground. If you are, mazel tov. That's great. Most of us have not. Most of us have been seduced by the sofa and the chair and the recliner. Most of us are sultans of slouching. But we can learn how to sit sustainably without twisting our legs into a pretzel. We can relax into a posture without forcing it that is sustainable. We can learn the Buddha's basic technique, and we can practice it perhaps 5 minutes every 12 hours or so the first week. By the second week, we may be ready to practice for 10 minutes every 12 hours or so. By the third week, we could be ready to practice for 15 minutes every 12 hours or so. I trust you've observed a pattern thus far. By the conclusion of the 15th week, we could get so comfortable sitting sustainably that enjoying a 15-minute lesson and a 60-minute practice will be no challenge at all. And assuming that you've been coming to these live streams, which are absolutely free, every 12 hours or so, either live or recorded, because YouTube does a pretty good job of saving these live streams. There's no reason why you could not master the Eightfold Path. However, when you have questions about Buddha's chanting, or meditation, or philosophy, or practice, ask your questions. Type them out in great detail in the chat window. Either in the chat window if you're watching live, or the comment area window, that's what I'm looking for, the comment window if you're watching a replay. And I will be eager to either give you a link to a video where I've already answered that question, or just answer it afresh in the next live stream. That's how you master the path. When you practice on your own, I always recommend having your phone or a steno pad with you so you can jot down questions in detail so that you can get them answered as soon as possible. Having a teacher who has mastered the path and who speaks your language, assuming your language is American English, is a huge advantage. Make the most of it. Okay, so we've talked about what enlightenment is and how quickly you could take to accomplish it. Now let's turn our attention to the actual Eightfold Path. Okay. Now, for those of us who evolved to have only 4 fingers and 1 thumb on each hand, 8 is befuddling. That's why the Eightfold Path divides down into subgroups. One group of 2 and 2 groups of 3 for a total of 8. There's nothing mystical or magical. It's just how it works out. Now, because I'm a big old weirdo, the way this makes sense for me is to start with number 7. I know, that's weird. It's lame. But so am I. So, the 7th fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path is mindfulness. So let's look at that right now. There's a lot of confusion about mindfulness and meditation. If you've ever had the opportunity to go to university and attend Philosophy 101, one of the things that will stand out to you is that the ancient philosophers of Greece, who all were raised in the same culture and who all spoke the same language, still found communication to be confusing. And they developed all these tools to make sure to reduce the confusion. And one of the tools is agree on terminology. How much more complicated is it when you're dealing with authors and students from different cultures, from different times, speaking different languages? And it turns out that despite what we've been told growing up, translation isn't a science, it's an art, and it's super messy. With all these variables, with all these moving parts, is it any wonder that there's so much confusion when it comes to teaching and applying the Buddha's teachings? Personally, I found that viewing the Buddha's teachings through the metaphoric lens of neuroscience really cuts through the confusion. Un momento. Here we go. So, the 7th fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path is mindfulness, known in Pali as sati. How do we practice it? Well, check this out. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we mean to or not, we are wired to automatically access our sympathetic nervous system, This bad boy is found in the middle third of our spinal cord. That's right, our central nervous system kind of looks like a big old tadpole, doesn't it? So, what does this sympathetic nervous system evolve to do? Glad you asked. This bad boy is evolved. Whoops, I got way ahead of myself and I apologize for that. So, let's rewind. Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. Therefore, it should come as little surprise that there is great confusion when it comes to Buddhist instruction. There are a lot of teachers, and many of them well-intentioned, who insist that the path is all about active concentration and active contemplation. They give them fancy-sounding words like samatha and vipassana and the like. But did you know that the only part of the brain that is capable of actively concentrating and actively analyzing are structures such as the medial prefrontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex? Now, don't get me wrong. Prefrontal cortex is a lovely tool if you want to organize or sort or analyze or concentrate or calculate. It's your best pal. But you can ask any gym rat, they'll tell you you can only do so many concentration curls before it hurts. And there's a point where if it hurts a little bit, it's a dull hurt, it might build your strength and might build your size. But if you ignore your body's signals and you keep pushing through that pain, eventually you'll experience a sharp hurt, and that's an injury. And if you persist beyond that, you might actually permanently injure your bicep. Did you know that when we overuse our prefrontal cortex, when we use it for that which it has not evolved to do, when we can pretty much abuse our prefrontal cortex, according to fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, this thing lights up. This lumpy thing right here, I don't know, maybe the size of an almond. This thing is known as the amygdala. It resides in the metaphoric dungeon of our limbic system. And it functions as the seat of aggression and anxiety, which is pretty much the opposite of peace, if you ask me. Furthermore, if we persist in abusing and exhausting our prefrontal cortex, we will present with symptoms of depression. Now, I don't know about you, but I am not experiencing a deficiency of terror or rage or despair. I do not need to increase my store of those things. How about you? So if you are as hedonistic as me and you want more peace and more joy and more love and more insight and more resilience, I think it's a good idea that we do not abuse our prefrontal cortex and we use the parts of our brain that are best suited for mindfulness and meditation. And now we can turn our attention to our inhalation, where we are already wired by evolution to automatically access this sympathetic nervous system located in the middle third of our spinal cord. Now, what has this bad boy evolved to do? Glad you ask. It has evolved to perceive, but to perceive in a very special way, to perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly, which is completely opposite of active concentration and active analysis. Think of it this way. Active analysis and active concentration are like you or me writing a play, hiring a cast, hiring a producer, hiring a director, and putting this whole thing together. But grooving with our sympathetic nervous system is like you or me paying our ticket, going to a theater, sitting down and watching the show, watching somebody else's screenplay, somebody else's direction, somebody else's production, other people's actors, other people's words, other people's emotions, us just sitting back and enjoying the show. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. We are wired to perceive sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like, including emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We are wired to perceive spectrums of phenomena, from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. And this can be overwhelming. But I've got some good news for you. Every time we exhale, and this is and we're talking about meditation, which is the seventh fold of the Buddha's eightfold path. Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we mean to or not, we are already wired to automatically access our parasympathetic nervous system. This bad boy is located in the bottom third and the upper third of that same spinal cord, which is terribly convenient. It has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. Which takes the edge off. No, it doesn't eradicate our experience, but it does make think of it this way. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could feel a little bit less solid, a little bit less permanent, a little bit less defining. Now, all humans have evolved to think symbolically, so let's add some figurative language into the mix, like sprinkling fish food into an aquarium. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could begin to feel as if it was as non-graspable as a vast empty void. Now, any good English teacher will remind us that a simile is only as useful as it is relatable. So, what is a real-world example of a non-graspable vast empty void? How about the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could be tantalizing to the eye, is rather non-graspable to the hand. And so now you get it. The mystery of emptiness solved. The mystery of meditation solved. Every time we inhale, we are wired to notice. Every time we exhale, we are wired to release at least a little bit. And just as you go through life taking more than one inhalation and more than one exhalation over the hopefully numerous decades that you live, but instead expect to breathe in and out constantly every day. Similarly, we notice and release with every cycle of breath, every minute of every hour of every day of every year of every decade. Like the ponderous pendulum of a grandfather clock swinging to the right and to the left. We notice and release and notice and release. Now you could say, well, dude, if that's already hardwired into me, then what do I need the Buddha, and what do I need to sit down funny, and what do I need to notice shit? Why can't I just do it on autopilot? Because, in one word, Urkel. Our central nervous system is a three-ring circus. And the clowns are out of control. And just like the TV show Urkel. Urkel was a sweet kid, clever, but klutzy as hell, who was forever saying or asking, "Did I do that?" Yes, Urkel, you did. But just like Urkel, our brain is clever and good-hearted. And if we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, not only will it do that, because that's pretty easy to do, but as a side effect, momentarily it'll coordinate with our sympathetic nervous system, which is terribly convenient. But wait, there's more. If we ask that same brain to silently, mentally, passively recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, all of a sudden it'll begin cooperating with our parasympathetic nervous system, at least somewhat, at least during our that exhalation. And so one of the greatest, most delicious ironies is that simply by silently and mentally and passively reciting this monosyllabic words, we can coordinate, or we can heighten the coordination of our central nervous system in a way that helps us to savor the perception and release of mindfulness and meditation. Now, recall a few moments ago I mentioned that when we receive bad instruction and we abuse our prefrontal cortex by over-concentrating and over-analyzing, our cranky, anxious amygdala lights up like a Christmas tree. Remember that? Well, here's the irony. When we give our exhausted prefrontal cortex a rest, when we embrace the partnership of our inhalation and our exhalation with our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous systems, not only does our amygdala calm down, but this thing lights up. This thing that kind of looks like a catcher's mitt, this thing that the big kids call the anterior cingulate gyrus, this thing that functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. This is why the greatest Dzogchen Lamas of Tibet have always insisted that the highest love is spontaneous and uncontrived. Perhaps that is why 50% of the Eightfold Path pertains to loving kindness. Let's take a deeper look at that right now. Did I go the wrong direction? I think I went the wrong direction. Okay. So, we've talked about mindfulness. We've talked about meditation. 50% of the Eightfold Path pertains to loving kindness. Let's break it on down. We have the mental morality of kind intention, the essence of the Bodhisattva vow. We have kind communication, the essence of interpersonal morality. We have kind conduct, the essence of physical morality or nonviolence. According to the great Karma Chakme Rinpoche, the essence of all the hundreds of Pratimoksha vows is simply non-violence. That's it. Sit on your damn hands. Shut your mouth. Do no harm. The fourth facet of loving kindness would be kind commerce. What's that? It's basically not being a Karen and not being a Chad, not forever trying to get people fired or drive other concerns out of business. It's about abandoning competition and cruelty and replacing them with cooperation and kindness. Just as Jesus allegedly taught that man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for the man, likewise, humans are not built to be sacrificed upon the altar of an economic system. Au contraire, our economic systems exist to serve humanity. And if someone tells you otherwise, it's because they're trying to enslave you, which is very impolite. Well, we've talked about the 4 facets of love and kindness. We've talked about mindfulness and meditation. That's 6. We have 2 more folds of the Eightfold Path. Let's giddy up. Let us pretend there were 2 extremes and a happy medium. On one extreme, you got contrivance. You got the guy who says, the guy who stands up at open mic night at the comedy club and says, "And now it is time for the spontaneous humor." And then he reaches in his hip pocket and pulls out a 3x5 card. So much for spontaneity. On the other extreme, you have scattered spontaneity. That's like, well, it's illustrated in this piece of tantric art by this gal the color of a cumulus cloud who appears to be actively sporting in tantric union. And she reminds us of the scattered spontaneity, kind of like that so-called great idea we have after consuming our 3rd espresso in 30 minutes. We're lit up and confident. Consider her partner, the color of the azure sky, who appears to be passively savoring the same tantric union. This reminds us of a flavor of spontaneity that is centered. When our choices, utterances, and deeds flow from effort, let's try this again. When our choices, utterances, and deeds practice the effortless effort of flowing from love's centered spontaneity, then our lives can be much more blissful. And that bliss is inferred by this piece of tantric art, by a real or imagined Buddha's paradise. And that brings us to the 6th fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. Now we come down to a right view of impermanence. Do we need theory? Do we need belief? Do we need a doctoral dissertation? No. We are wired to notice change, whether we want to or not. We can't help but notice change. We notice change in our environment. We notice change in our bodies. We notice change in our relationships. We notice change in our minds. We notice change in our perceptions, change in our emotions, change in our intentions, change in our thoughts, change in our memories, or what we recall in the moment, change in our imaginings. It's like we are in the middle of a great maelstrom of change. Ever-changing, one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. And so you see the entirety of the Eightfold Path is driven by the engine of mindfulness and meditation. Practice mindfulness and meditation, and you cannot help but be empathetic. Practice mindfulness and meditation, and you cannot help but notice change. Practice mindfulness and meditation, and you cannot help but surf the present moment with effortless effort. Practice with me once every 12 hours, starting modestly at 5 minutes a pop, building gradually until you can sit for 75 minutes, no problemo. You will still experience the full spectrum of human emotions. You will still experience ugliness and beauty, harmony and discord, pleasure and pain, deliciousness and disgustingness, fragrance and foulness. You will still experience a full spectrum of human emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. But you will have mastered the Eightfold Path with the competency with which you now tie your shoes. Let's practice together. After approximately, what's the word I'm looking for? Here we go. Let us practice together after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping because YouTube. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I've spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to meditate like a Jedi, which is made possible... Whoopsie, that's the wrong button. Let's try this again. Which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. So, for this morning's, in preparation of this morning's 5-minute meditation, let us turn to the very first recitation of Jigme Lingpa's Longchen Ningtig Ngondro. So I guess I should have been more playful with the cursor. So, Jigme Lingpa's Longchen Ningtig Ngondro, translated by the late Tulku Thondup, adapted and amplified by this goofy guy right here. So all we're going to do is do a quick chant and then rest the mind. Please chant with me. You who have attained Buddhahood primordially. Aha, so primordially is a reference to Samantabhadra Samantabhadri Karamamudra. So quick like a bunny, I'm going to add a picture. Okay, so let's give this a shot. You who have attained Buddhahood primordially. But have never ceased appearing as a Rupakaya's perfect body or form, exhibiting various illusory manifestations, yet free from both the grasping mind and its object, the body, mind, constituent sensory spheres and bases, appearing in human form while in fact a Buddha, radiating thousands of light rays comprising wisdom and compassion. I depend on you for from refuge, not simply for this life, but forever. Bestow your blessings upon me. And now we're ready to practice. Quick review. We've already got this, but I just want to remind you. We silently, mentally, and passively recite the demonstrative pronoun this as we inhale, while kicking back and watching the antics of mind as it perceives, emotes, intends, reasons, recalls, and imagines. While we exhale, we silently, mentally, and passively recite the one-syllable verb ease, while we relax into mind's non-graspable nature. Okay, for 5 minutes, let's go for it. Let's just sit like this photograph of a wooden statue. I had a problem with the timer. Please bear with me. Okay. Let us seal this practice by chanting love and releases wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. Together. May all minds of all beings lucid yet void no be as peacefully enlightened as a Buddha's mind symbolized by a Wansaramubisha. May all speech of all beings resounding yet void no be as joyfully loving as a Buddha's speech symbolized by mantra. May all forms of all beings sensual yet void no be as beautifully healthy as a Yadam archetype depicted in Buddhist statuary. May all lots of all beings appearing yet void no be as fortunate as a pure land of law represented in Buddhist paintings. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 11 1/4 hours, I would very much like to return in today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Fourth be with you always.